The first scream came from the balcony. No one noticed at first. The court was too busy laughing. Crystal chandeliers shimmered under bioluminescent light. Silk banners bearing the sigil of House Varelia hung in elegant folds. Nobles in silver and violet ceremonial armor toasted to political unity. And at the center of it all stood the human. Adrian Vale. Unarmed. Unarmored. Unimpressive. Someone raised a glass. To the princess and her diplomatic pet. Laughter rippled across the chamber. Adrian only smiled politely. Princess Serelith sat beside him on the elevated dais, her posture regal, chin high, golden eyes scanning the room with controlled grace. She had chosen him despite resistance from half the empire. A symbolic marriage. A bridge between species. But tonight, even she felt the tension. The scream came again. Closer. Then the balcony doors detonated inward. The explosion was not loud enough to be theatrical. It was precise. Shards of crystal tore across the air. Plasma fire erupted from the upper galleries. The musicians fell first. Courtiers scattered in chaos. Imperial guards surged toward the princess. "Protect the air," someone shouted. Serelith felt heat rip across her left arm as a plasma bolt grazed her shoulder. She stumbled back. And then, she saw Adrian. He did not panic. He did not freeze. He moved. Not wildly. Not heroically. Efficiently. A guard's rifle discharged toward him. The shot should have cored through his chest. Instead, Adrian stepped inside the line of fire. One twist. One elbow strike. The rifle clattered to the floor. The guard followed. Another attacker vaulted over the balcony railing. Adrian caught the alien midair and redirected the momentum into the marble pillar behind him. The crack echoed like a thunderclap. Serelith's breath caught. This was not the man who brewed tea at sunrise. This was not the soft-spoken diplomat who tolerated mockery with gentle humor. Plasma bolts streaked across the chamber. Adrian advanced through them. No armor. No visible shield. Just impossible precision. A noble gasped, "He's human. They're not supposed to." The sentence ended as Adrian disarmed another assassin with surgical brutality. Not killing. Never killing. Disabling. Breaking weapons. Breaking joints. Breaking confidence. Within seconds, the assassins were on the ground. Within seconds, the laughter had died. Prince Regent Kayla rose from his seat, shock twisting his features. You're a civilian." Adrian slowly turned. The warmth in his expression was gone. "I was," he said. The two words chilled the chamber more effectively than any weapon. Imperial guards hesitated. None dared raise their rifles now. Serelith descended the dais carefully. Her arm burned, but she ignored it. "Adrian," she whispered. He crossed the space between them immediately, hands gentle as they examined her injury. "You're bleeding," he said softly. "I'm fine," she answered. But she wasn't looking at her wound. She was looking at him. There was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not anger. Not fury. Decision. Behind them, Kayla tried to edge toward the emergency scepter embedded in the throne armrest. He never reached it. Adrian moved faster than alien reflexes could follow. Kayla struck the marble floor hard, breath leaving him in a stunned gasp. Adrian's knee pinned him in place. The entire imperial court stood frozen. "You attempted to kill my wife," Adrian said quietly. No shouting. No theatrics. Controlled wrath. The kind forged, not born. Kayla snarled, "You're nothing but a symbolic mate. A harmless." The word died under Adrian's gaze. Serelith felt it then. The shift in the room. Not fear of violence. Fear of realization. The nobles had mocked humanity for centuries. Called them adaptable. Clever. Industrious. Soft. They had mistaken patience for weakness. Adrian rose slowly, pulling Kayla upright by the collar. "You miscalculated," he said. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Because now they understood something terrible. The human had not fought like prey. He had fought like someone trained to end wars. Serelith stepped closer. "Adrian, what are you?" For a heartbeat, his eyes softened again. "Yours," he replied gently. But when he turned back to face the court, the softness vanished. And every noble in that chamber understood. They had not married into a harmless species. They had married into a restrained one. And restraint, once broken, changes empires. The chamber had never been so quiet. Not during executions. Not during declarations of war. Not even during coronations. Prince Regent Kayla knelt in restraints at the center of the marble floor. The assassins had been dragged away. Medics treated the wounded in silence. And every pair of alien eyes remained fixed on the human. Adrian stood beside Princess Seralith as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. As if he had not dismantled an elite kill team in under 60 seconds. Imperial Commander Vile stepped forward slowly. "You will explain," the commander said carefully. "It wasn't a demand. It was fear disguised as authority." Seralith glanced at her husband. "Adrian, they deserve the truth." He studied her for a long moment. There was no defiance in his expression. Only resignation. "I had hoped," he said quietly, "that part of my life would remain irrelevant." The chamber leaned closer. He continued. "Before I became a diplomat, before I ever stepped into your court, I served." Murmurs rippled. "Every species serves," a noble snapped nervously. Adrian shook his head once. "Not like we do." The lights above flickered as the court's central archive system activated. Commander Vile had ordered a background scan the moment Adrian dropped the first assassin. Now the results appeared in holographic projection across the chamber. At first, it was harmless. Birth records. Education. Diplomatic training. Then the file expanded. Restricted access. Military classification, Omega Black. The chamber's AI paused. Access requires sovereign authorization. Seralith did not hesitate. Granted. The hologram shifted. And the room changed. Campaign markers spread across half a dozen star systems. Redacted conflicts. Unacknowledged interventions. Extinction-level insurgencies quietly ended. A unit designation pulsed at the center. Human Strategic Response Group. Call sign, Grey Veil. A noble whispered, "That unit doesn't exist." Adrian gave a faint, humorless smile. That was the point. Images flickered. Brief, fragmented. Urban battlefields. Void boarding actions. Hostage extractions in zero atmosphere. At the center of several after-action reports was a name. Commander Adrian Vale. Decorations followed. Terran Medal of Absolute Defense. Iron Citadel Cross. 3 separate commendations marked classified even to allied governments. Seralith felt the air leave her lungs. "You told me you were logistics," she said softly. "I was," Adrian answered. "In war, logistics wins." Commander Vile's voice lowered. "You ended the Karthik revolt." "Yes." "You neutralized the Nox Dominion incursion before it reached civilian sectors." "Yes." "You were the one sent when governments didn't want wars, but couldn't afford to lose them." Adrian did not answer that. He didn't need to. The silence confirmed it. Kayla stared up from his restraints, horror replacing arrogance. "You're an executioner." Adrian finally looked at him. "No," he said calmly. "I am what humanity sends when it wants the killing to stop." The distinction settled heavily over the chamber. Seralith stepped closer to him. "Why hide this from me?" His eyes softened. "Because I didn't want you to ever need that version of me." The burn on her arm pulsed. The attempted assassination had not been subtle. It had been an escalation. And everyone in the chamber understood what that meant now. If a decorated human war commander had just been forced out of retirement inside their throne room, what would humanity itself do if this attack was interpreted as an act of imperial hostility? Commander Vile swallowed. "Does Earth know what happened tonight?" Adrian's gaze shifted toward the vaulted ceiling, as if he could see through layers of stone and atmosphere. "Yes." A low vibration trembled through the palace floor. Not an explosion. Not an attack. A signal. The court's planetary defense grid lit up in holographic projection. Unknown signatures translating into high orbit. Multiple vessels. Sleek. Angular. Silent. Transponders broadcasting Terran registry codes. One ship's designation blinked brighter than the rest. TSV Resolute. A dreadnought-class strategic carrier. Its weapons were not powered. But they were present. A noble's voice cracked. "They mobilized that fast." Adrian exhaled slowly. They were already nearby. Seralith turned to him sharply. "You anticipated this." "I prepared for the possibility," he corrected gently. Below them, Kayla's composure finally shattered. "You've brought an invasion fleet." "No," Adrian said evenly. "I brought witnesses." The orbital feed zoomed in. The Terran vessels maintained defensive formation. No targeting locks. No aggressive posturing. Just quiet, undeniable capability. Adrian faced the court fully now. You attempted to eliminate the future empress of this empire. He paused. You involved my species. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. I will not declare war, he continued calmly. Not unless you force my hand. Controlled wrath. Not emotional. Strategic. Every noble present understood the subtext. Human restraint had limits. And they were standing on the edge of them. Serelith reached for his hand. For the first time since the attack, she understood the truth. She had not married a harmless man. She had married the calm center of a storm. And storms do not shout. They arrive. The Empire did not panic. It calculated. Within the hour, the High War Council convened in the inner chamber beneath the palace. Massive holographic projections filled the circular hall, displaying the Terran fleet in high orbit. 7 vessels. 1 dreadnought. All holding position. All silent. They violate no treaty, Admiral Corvith growled, talons tapping the table. But their presence is coercion. They arrived after an assassination attempt on their citizen, Commander Vile replied coldly. A citizen married to our heir. A former war commander, another added nervously. Across the chamber, Adrian Vale stood beside Princess Serelith. He had not been disarmed. No one had dared to ask. You anticipated this attack, Corvith accused. I prepared for instability, Adrian corrected. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are entitled to. The air tightened. Serelith watched the council carefully. These were not fools. They were ancient political predators. They would not lash out blindly. They would test him. And the test came quickly. The Terran fleet must withdraw, Corvith declared. Immediately. Adrian tilted his head slightly. No. The single word landed heavier than a threat. You stand in our sovereign chamber and deny our military command. Corvith's voice rose. I stand in my wife's empire, Adrian replied evenly, after your nobles attempted to murder her. Silence. Vile leaned forward. What guarantee do we have that this is not a prelude to Terran occupation? Adrian met his gaze. The same guarantee you have always had. And what is that? Humanity does not conquer allies. The wording was deliberate. Corvith's eyes narrowed. And if we cease to be allies? Adrian did not blink. Then you will discover why we do not conquer enemies either. The implication rippled through the chamber. Not conquest. Elimination of threat. Serelith felt it, the knife's edge the discussion balanced on. Kayla had not acted alone. Factions within the Empire feared Terran influence. They believed humanity soft. Manipulable. Tonight had shattered that illusion. But pride dies slowly. Corvith activated a new projection. Imperial fleets mobilizing along the outer sectors. Not attacking. Positioning. A message without words. You see? Corvith said. We also can prepare. Adrian studied the display. Yes, he said calmly. You can. No escalation in his tone. No visible anger. And somehow that was more terrifying. Vile spoke carefully. If a single Terran weapon powers up, this becomes war. Adrian nodded once. If a single additional attempt is made on my wife's life, this becomes extinction. The room froze. Not shouted. Not dramatic. A statement of consequence. Corvith's claws dug into the table. Extinction? You presume much for a young species. Adrian finally stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. You mistake youth for limitation. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as a secondary Terran signal entered orbit. New vessels. Smaller. Faster. Specialized. Serelith recognized the configuration from the war files revealed earlier. Grey Veil escort craft. Adrian continued calmly. You see 7 ships. You assume that is the response. He gestured subtly toward the projection. It is the warning. The High Council members exchanged uneasy glances. You would destroy an empire over one failed coup. Corvith demanded. Adrian's eyes hardened, not with rage. With certainty. You misunderstand again. He looked directly at the Admiral. I would dismantle any structure that endangers her. The word dismantle carried weight. Not genocide. Not chaos. Systematic removal. Like a surgeon cutting out a tumor. Serelith finally stepped forward, voice steady but commanding. Enough. The chamber stilled immediately. She faced her counsel. You tested him. She turned to Adrian. And you proved your point. Her gaze moved back to the fleet projection. We will conduct an internal purge of all conspirators. Publicly. Corvith opened his mouth to protest. She silenced him with a look. Furthermore, we will issue a joint declaration reaffirming alliance with Terra. A long pause. And the fleet? Vile asked. All eyes returned to Adrian. He met Serelith's gaze. The storm behind his eyes quieted, slightly. When arrests begin, he said calmly, the fleet will reposition beyond your outer defense perimeter. Not retreat. Not surrender. A measured step back. Trust, but verified. Corvith exhaled slowly. You operate like a blade hidden in silk. Adrian allowed a faint smile. That is generally effective. The council session adjourned with no applause. No relief. Only awareness. They had pushed. And discovered the boundary. Later, alone on the palace balcony, Serelith stood beside him. You would have done it, she said quietly. Yes. No hesitation. A pause. For you? None. She studied him carefully. You are not angry. No. Then what are you? He looked out toward the stars where the Terran fleet hovered like silent guardians. I am resolved. The difference mattered. Anger burns quickly. Resolution endures. Below them, Imperial arrest squads began detaining conspirators across the capital. Above them, the Terran dreadnought powered down one of its weapon arrays, a visible sign of de-escalation. The Empire had tested him. He had not broken. He had not shouted. He had simply shown them the cost of miscalculation. And somewhere in the darker corners of the galaxy, rival empires were watching the transmission feeds. Learning. Humanity did not roar. It positioned. And when necessary, it ended threats quietly. Serelith slipped her hand into his. The court will never laugh at you again. Adrian's expression softened slightly. I preferred the laughter. Because laughter meant peace. And peace meant he could remain what he wanted to be. Her husband. Not the storm. The Empire did not erupt into chaos. It hardened. Within the hour, the High War Council assembled beneath the palace in the obsidian chamber, a circular hall carved from black crystal that amplified every voice and exposed every lie. Above the central table, a holographic projection displayed high orbit. 7 Terran vessels. 1 dreadnought-class carrier. Formation, defensive. Weapons, cold. Presence, unmistakable. They crossed into our sovereign orbital space without authorization, Admiral Corvith said, his scaled fingers resting on the table. That is an act of military pressure. Commander Vile did not look away from the projection. They entered after an assassination attempt on their citizen. A citizen who is married to our heir, another counselor added quietly. All eyes shifted to Adrian Vale. He stood beside Princess Serelith, hands loosely clasped behind his back. He wore the same black suit. The same calm expression. He did not look like a man who had just triggered fleet mobilization. You anticipated this, Corvith said. I considered the possibility, Adrian replied. That is not the same. It is when you are responsible for consequences. The chamber tightened. Serelith felt it, the old instinct of her people, push, test, dominate. They would probe for weakness. And they did. The Terran fleet will withdraw, Corvith declared. Immediately. Adrian met his gaze. No. The word echoed softly against obsidian walls. You presume authority in our chamber? Corvith's voice sharpened. I presume responsibility, Adrian said calmly. For what? The Admiral demanded. For ensuring there is not a second attempt. Silence. Vile leaned forward slightly. If a Terran weapon so much as warms its reactor coils, this becomes war. Adrian nodded once. If another strike is made against my wife, this becomes irreversible. The phrasing was deliberate. Not war. Not invasion. Irreversible. Corvith's pupils narrowed. You threaten extinction over palace politics. Adrian's gaze did not flicker. I do not threaten. I define outcomes. The air felt thinner. A junior counselor activated a secondary orbital feed. Imperial fleets were repositioning along the outer ring of the capital system. Not attacking. Signaling readiness. The room watched Adrian closely. He studied the projection without visible reaction. You mobilize, he said evenly. We remain stationary. You call that restraint? Corvith scoffed. Yes. The word carried no emotion. That unsettled them more than fury would have. Serelith finally spoke. What do you want? Adrian turned to her, and only her, before answering. Arrests. He faced the council again. Public. Transparent. Immediate. And if we refuse? Corvith pressed. Adrian stepped forward slightly. The chamber felt smaller. You won't. Corvith's claws tapped once against the table. You speak with certainty for a foreigner. Adrian's eyes sharpened. I speak as someone who has ended conflicts your historians classified as unsolvable. A flicker of unease crossed several faces. Vile accessed the restricted file again. The hologram displayed fragments of Adrian's service record. Strategic counterinsurgency. Deep space interdiction. Urban pacification campaigns. Conflicts that had quietly ceased after Terran involvement. You dismantled the Zethari insurgency in 11 days, Vile said slowly. Yes. That war had lasted 19 years. Adrian gave a small nod. Wars last when leaders hesitate. The implication was surgical. Corvith shifted tactics. If Terra believes we cannot protect our own heir, perhaps this marriage has destabilized us. Serelith's eyes flashed. But Adrian answered first. The destabilization began before the marriage. He turned slightly toward the Admiral. Your rival houses miscalculated. They believed humanity would respond diplomatically. And you did not. I did. A faint pause. They mistook diplomacy for fragility. The orbital feed shifted. A new Terran signal entered the system. 3 smaller vessels, configuration unmistakable to anyone who had reviewed the classified file. Grey Veil escort craft. Corvith stiffened. You reinforce. Adrian's tone remained level. I clarify. Vile's voice lowered. You are escalating. No, Adrian corrected. I am preventing escalation. The room absorbed that. Because the Terran ships still held defensive posture. No targeting locks. No weapon priming. They simply existed in undeniable proximity. Serelith stepped forward. Counselors, she said firmly, the conspirators attempted to assassinate your future empress. She let that settle. They endangered alliance with Terra. They endangered this empire. She looked at Corvith. You will begin arrests. A long silence. Then Corvith exhaled slowly. Very well. Orders were transmitted within minutes. Across the capital, palace guards began detaining known affiliates of Kalis faction. Live feeds streamed publicly. Transparency. Accountability. Exactly what Adrian had demanded. He watched the feeds carefully. Only when the first high-ranking conspirator was secured did he touch the communicator at his wrist. A single coded transmission. In orbit, the Terran dreadnought powered down one of its primary arrays. Not retreat. But a visible step back. The council noticed. You trust us that easily? Vile asked. Adrian shook his head slightly. I verify. Corvith studied him for a long moment. You operate like a blade hidden in silk. Adrian allowed the faintest smile. That is efficient. The session adjourned without celebration. The Empire had tested him. He had not raised his voice. He had not issued ultimatums filled with rage. He had simply positioned consequences where everyone could see them. Later, on the palace balcony overlooking the city lights, Serelith stood beside him. You would have done it, she said quietly. Yes. No hesitation. For you? None. She studied him carefully. You were not angry. No. Then what was that? He looked toward the stars, where Terran ships gleamed like silent sentinels. Resolution. The word carried weight. Anger burns hot and fades. Resolution persists. Below them, arrest transports moved through the capital. Above them, the Terran fleet held steady. The Empire had pushed. And discovered the boundary. Serelith slipped her hand into his. They will never laugh at you again. Adrian's expression softened slightly. I preferred the laughter. Because laughter meant peace. And peace meant he could remain what he chose to be. Her husband. Not the storm. The attack came at dawn. Not from within. From beyond. The Dravith Dominion had been watching the broadcasts. They had seen the assassination attempt. Seen the Terran fleet. Seen the internal fractures of the Varelian Empire. And they had miscalculated. They posture, the Dominion warlord transmitted across open frequencies. Young species bluff loudly. Then the Dominion fleet translated into the outer system. 100 warships. Weapons hot. No declaration. No diplomacy. They targeted the Imperial shipyards first. Panic rippled across Virelia. Admiral Corvith stared at the incoming fleet projection. We cannot match that force. Princess Serelith stood at the command balcony. Adrian stood beside her. He did not look surprised. They chose the wrong moment, he said quietly. Corvith snapped toward him. Your fleet is outnumbered 14-1. Adrian activated his wrist console. In orbit, the Terran dreadnought TSV Resolute shifted formation. Not retreating. Expanding. Its outer hull plates separated. Internal structures unfolded like mechanical petals. The Dominion fleet hesitated. What is that? Vile whispered. Adrian answered calmly. Deterrence. From the Resolute's core, a field projected outward, not a beam, not a weapon, but a system-wide suppression net. Dominion targeting arrays flickered. Weapons went dark. Communications scrambled. Engines destabilized under controlled gravitic interference. One by one, Dominion ships drifted powerless in space. No explosions. No firestorms. No casualties. Just silence. On every Dominion bridge, alarms screamed. What have they done? Adrian's voice carried across an open channel to the Dominion flagship. You entered Allied space with hostile intent. The Dominion warlord snarled on the transmission feed. You dare disable a sovereign fleet? Yes. You could have destroyed us. Yes. The simple honesty shook the feed. Then why didn't you? Adrian looked toward Serelith before answering. Because annihilation is inefficient. The Dominion fleet remained suspended in controlled paralysis. Imperial commanders stared at the display in disbelief. You ended them, Corvith breathed. No, Adrian corrected. I stopped them. Serelith studied him. You could have shown wrath. I did. She frowned slightly. This is restraint. He shook his head once. No. He turned back to the command display. Wrath is not rage. The Dominion warlord's image flickered as Terran boarding signals locked in. Wrath, Adrian continued calmly, is removing a threat so completely it never rises again. The suppression field adjusted. Dominion fleet AI cores were overwritten. Weapon systems permanently fused inert. Drive matrices disabled beyond repair. In less than 6 minutes, 100 warships were reduced to drifting monuments of miscalculation. Alive. But harmless. A message, not a massacre. Across the galaxy, observers watched the live feed. Human ships had not fired. Had not shouted. Had not threatened. They had simply acted. Corvith exhaled slowly. You ended a war before it began. Yes. Serelith stepped closer to him. You told the Council you would dismantle any structure that endangered me. I meant it. She searched his face. And if the Dominion returns? They won't. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Because every military strategist in the galaxy had just learned the same lesson. Human restraint is not weakness. It is policy. And when policy shifts, it shifts decisively. The suppression field disengaged gradually. Dominion escape pods launched. Human vessels did not pursue. They simply recorded. Witnessed. Ensured compliance. Hours later, in the Imperial throne chamber, repaired, quiet, Serelith stood before her court. Behind her stood Adrian. Not in armor. Not in uniform. Just her husband. The Dominion sought to exploit perceived weakness, she declared. They discovered something else. She turned slightly toward him. They discovered that humanity does not roar before it strikes. A murmur moved through the nobles. They position. Adrian remained silent. And when forced, she continued, they defined the outcome. Later, alone once more on the balcony, Serelith rested against him. You never lost control, she said softly. He watched Terran ships reposition beyond the outer defensive perimeter. I did, he replied quietly. She looked up at him. When? The moment they fired on you. She felt the truth of it. And yet you chose restraint. He nodded. Because wrath is not about destruction. His hand tightened gently around hers. It is about protection. Below them, Varelian and Terran engineers worked side by side reinforcing orbital defenses. Above them, the Terran fleet began its slow withdrawal. Not retreat. Trust restored. The Empire would never laugh at him again. But more importantly, they would never mistake him again. Serelith smiled faintly. My harmless human. Adrian's expression softened. I prefer harmless. She looked at the stars one last time. And if they ever test you again? His voice was calm. They won't. Because across the galaxy, every admiral, every emperor, every warlord now understood. The princess thought she knew her human mate. The Empire learned what that meant. And the galaxy learned something far more dangerous. Humanity's greatest weapon is not fury. It is control.